that, I will start by asking, 5 months in reform, any regrets?
You know, I don't know if you saw this. Yesterday, I was in the House of Commons and did the King's Speech debate, and there was a heckle from across the chamber, which is quite rare these days, because particularly from a Lib Dem, because there aren't many Lib Dems with a good sense of humour in Parliament. But I said something like, you know, here we are 2 years later after the general election, and he was like, well, you're in a different party, mate. And I suppose he was trying to make fun of me and embarrass me, but I didn't feel embarrassed at all. I think it's the best decision I've ever made, and there hasn't been a single day since I made that decision that I've regretted it. And, you know, the truth is that I was a Reform MP before I became a Reform MP. I was probably a Reform MP before there were any Reform MPs, and it was only a matter of time that I did this, and I'm convinced it was the right thing, and that we will be sat here in a few years' time after the next general election, and many people who mocked me for doing this or said it would end badly would have a bit of egg on their face, because I think something incredible is happening across the country at the moment, and there is such a sense of energy and momentum around reform. It's just unbelievable.
So your only regret was you didn't do it sooner?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I regret that I attempted vainly to mould the Conservative Party into reform. But I think I said this to you once before, that my kids, I've got 3 girls, and to my wife and I's horror, they're always buying slime. And they sit watching telly, playing with this slime, to the point that multiple times I've banned it in our household. But they kind of try and mould it into something, and then when they go to bed at the end of the day, it just reverts to type. And I kind of think that's a bit like the Tory party, in that I spent about 3 years of my life trying to mould it into something that it was never going to be. And I should have just accepted that. You know, I think reform, we are lucky in this country to have reform, because reform gives people like me and many, many millions of people across the country a route, you know, a vehicle for changing this country for the better that previous generations didn't have. And I'm certainly going to do everything I can every day until the next general election to make sure that we win it, and we use this platform to transform the country.
Picking up on your slime analogy there, one of the things you are now trying to mould is, as Reform's economic spokesman, the party's economic philosophy. What exactly is it? How would you define it?
Look, I was thinking about this through the context of the local elections, and it's clear that Reform has picked a lane, and is the party of working people. We're not the party of Benefit Street. And we're also not really the party of the rich, the super rich. You know, we're not Benefit Street and we're not Belgravia. Reform is the party of the 80% of people in this country who are going out there every day, working hard, just trying to better themselves and their families. We'll let the Labour Party be the party of Benefit Street, and we'll let the Labour Party and the Tory Party fight out for who represents Kensington and Belgravia. We are there to ensure that hard-working people in this country have a government on their side which is going to do absolutely everything to make sure that they are treated fairly and respectfully, and that the interests of them and the British people generally is always put first. And that is what our economic policy is going to be all about.
I mean, the criticism you've had from the Conservatives is that you are a party of welfare. Why do you think it took so long to clarify Reform's position on the two-child benefit?
Well, I think Nigel came to the original position, which was a very reasonable one, actually. The original position was that the cap would be lifted for British people who are in work. That was a reasonable position. And what was Nigel's motivation behind that? Well, he wanted to do something that was pro-family. And let's be honest with ourselves, previous governments, including the one that I was part of, did very little for the family. And there are lots of smart people who've campaigned on family issues, people I've respected over the years, like Lord Farmer, who have just become incredibly disillusioned with the fact that parties like the Conservative Party that should have been about the family actually weren't. So it was a reasonable position, but the reality is we can't afford that.
Yeah.
You know, the public finances are a mess. They've got significantly worse under Rachel Reeves. And if we want to help, as we do, Brits to have families, it's not going to be through welfare. It is going to be through giving them a leg up by having good jobs, bringing their bills down, trying to cut their taxes, helping people onto the housing ladder, helping to cut rents for young people. That will be the reform way of tackling this issue, not through welfare. We are a party of workers, not welfare.
What's Nigel like to work with on policy?
I found Nigel to be extremely decisive, very consistent, and someone who actually listens and takes advice. He's got his own views, obviously, and I respect that. We don't agree on absolutely everything, but
What don't you agree on?
well, there are very few things that we've disagreed on, and Nigel's rule, which I think is a very reasonable one, is if you have disagreements, you have them behind closed doors. And if only other political parties had taken that advice over the course of the last 10 or 20 years, things might have been very different. What I admire about Nigel is the fact that he has been consistent on the big issues facing this country for a very long time. And I think when you're looking for a prime minister, consistency is incredibly important. You know, look at Keir Starmer. Well, I mean, there's a couple of issues he's been consistent on. You know, his kind of obsession with international law, and that's led him to give away the Chagos Islands and betray British veterans who've served in Northern Ireland, although he's kind of failed to deliver what he wanted to do on both of those. But in other respects, he's kind of been all over the place. Most of our recent Conservative Prime Ministers were exactly the same as well. I think with Nigel, you know, broadly speaking, where he stands on most of the big issues, and certainly on the economy, you know, he's been pretty clear where he stands for a very long time. And if you're going to serve under somebody in government, you know, that is the kind of person you want to serve under. Because if you're going to do tough things, you want to know the Prime Minister will have your back and isn't going to squelch on you, isn't going to go soft, you know, at the first sign of trouble. That is why I think Nigel will be a good Prime Minister.
You're part of this shadow cabinet. What are the meetings like?
We have one tomorrow morning. It's obviously it's a relatively small band of us.
Is it 4 or 5?
But it's growing
Yeah.
and will grow in the months ahead. There's an actual debate. You know, we discuss things as colleagues, which I can assure you never happened in the actual cabinet. I mean, I can't think of a cabinet meeting where, you know, cabinet was not a decision-making body. It was a rubber stamping body. Prime ministers would try and get it over with as quickly as they possibly could. You know, this is a group of people coming together, discussing things, reaching agreement. It's, you know, it's a very collegiate organisation. And the other thing about reform is, you know, we do tend to agree on things. And that is the big difference between reform, I would say, one of the big differences between reform and the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. You know, when I was in the Conservative Party, I always used to say it was a broad church, but without any religion. And its own internal intellectual inconsistencies and contradictions were constantly causing difficulties for it. Should we leave the ECHR or should we not leave the ECHR? Net zero or not? It's very rare to have those within reform, if at all. Actually, from the grassroots to those of us who are lucky enough to serve in Parliament, we're all really very on the same page, and that's very heartening, and gives you hope that actually, for once, if we were lucky enough to form a government, it would be a government that actually gets things done and doesn't just get mired in internal disputes.
It's been 2 weeks since the 7th of May deadline. Are you confident there'll be no more Tories joining?
I don't think there will be any more, and neither do I think that is necessarily something that the party should seek. You know, if you look at the candidate that we've just selected for the by-election in Makerfield, Robert Kenyon, he strikes me as exactly the kind of person that I would like to replicate 100 times as our candidates at a general election all over the country. This is someone who, as far as I'm aware, has not been active in other political parties, was drawn to reform because he genuinely wanted to represent his local community. He felt that the country was in a mess, that reform was our country's last hope. He's someone who's been, you know, he's a plumber, he's a veteran, although he doesn't shout about it. You know, he's a dad, he supports the local football team who he helps to coach. He is so deeply embedded in his community. He is reform. And so we need to set out and find 650 people like Robert Kenyon, and I'm convinced that we can do that.
You had a memorable exchange on the day of the election with Atkins, former colleague in the Conservative Party. You left a party that you were a member of for some 28 years or something like that. How hard has it been personally, you know, given those friendships, those relationships built up, how hard has it been the personal toll? Some of it's played out in public and some of it presumably in private.
Well, it is difficult. I mean, choosing to leave a political party which you've been a part of for 20 or 30 years is very tough, actually. And that is one of the reasons why it's pretty rare. In British politics, there are not many people who choose to do this. There are even fewer still who have chosen to lead parties that they stood to be leader of, that they were one of the more integral people of. I mean, you probably have to go back to, you know, the 1980s to find, you know, the formation of the SDP to find people who were making the same decision that I made. So yeah, it was hard, and it has strained some friendships and relationships which I valued. But having said that, I never viewed being an MP as a route to getting a social circle. A very good friend of mine in the Conservative Party, who I went for a cup of tea with recently, he said to me, "Rob, you must miss the club." And I thought about that. I said, well, not really, no. I never came into politics to be part of a club. You know, I came into politics to change things, to represent my constituents, to do what I think is best for the country, not to hang out in the smoking room in the House of Commons and have a glass of wine of an evening with a group of people. That's not to denigrate those people or to say that I'm not somebody who likes to
Do that tonight.
You know, to hang out. Well, you've got a glass of wine. I've got a glass of wine. I think politics is more important than that, and it was never important to me to hang around in a political party just for the social circle.
Yeah.
There's too much at stake than that.
I think you had a report you did a bust up in one of the GB newsrooms with Mark Francois. Was that the case?
I think that was a bit overstated, to be honest. You know, look, I have no animus towards any of these people. Mark is a good man. You know, I enjoyed his friendship. He was a good colleague. He's a good member of Parliament. We obviously disagree on the right way forward for the country, but I have chosen not to go around criticising other people. I'm not going to change that.
Are you worried at all about your policy on net migration, net immigration? There'll be some who criticise that from the likes of the OBR, the City, etc., about potentially damaging Britain's economic prospects.
No. No, look, for 25 years, our country has pursued this policy of mass migration, where we've imported millions of people from overseas. Latterly, under the Boris wave, they were people who weren't even coming to work. You know, 80% were people who were not coming here to work. And those people who were coming to work were predominantly low-wage, low-skilled people. I would argue this is one of the principal reasons why we've had such poor productivity growth over the course of that period. It has enabled businesses to rely on the easy lever of foreign labour rather than investing in British workers, their skills and careers, and definitely it has enabled them to deploy labour rather than investing in robotics, technology, the kind of things that would really make businesses more efficient. So it is this kind of human quantitative easing that we've had, which has become a model that successive chancellors have relied upon, rather than actually thinking carefully about how we can boost productivity and get growth going again in our economy. That has been part of the explanation why we failed as a country. Now, I would say that you can't advocate the immigration policy that I do, which is net emigration, where we have a sustained period where more people are leaving the country than coming in, unless you also say that a reform government is going to have some pretty radical welfare reform policies as well. Because businesses clearly need a workforce. There are millions of people out there who are able to do that. We've got approaching 10 million people in the country who are economically inactive in one form or another. And so we've got to couple our migration policy with what will be a very tough approach to welfare, where those people who are choosing not to work are strongly encouraged and incentivized to get back into the workplace. And that is both right for the economy and it's right morally, because we cannot live in a country where millions of people are being written off like this. And that's both at the younger end, where we've got approaching 1 million young people who are not in employment, education or training, and also at the older end as well, where particularly post-COVID, we've got a very large number of people who are choosing to retire or become economically inactive much earlier than they would have done a generation before. So those of us in Reform, Danny Kruger, James Orr, myself, are thinking very carefully about further welfare reforms and how we can achieve that, and bringing those people at both ends of the spectrum back into the workplace.
One of the things with Reform and voter base is it skews much more towards men than women. As the Reform economic spokesman, how are you going to sort of improve your party?
Well, I think that's a little overstated. I mean, there is some polling to back that up, but I don't think it's quite as pronounced as some people would like to think. I don't tend to think that you should have kind of men's issues and women's issues. That seems a bit dated to me.
Well, there was Women for Reform launched last summer, so I just wonder potentially if building on that work that was launched last summer by the party.
Well, we have some very, you're about to hear from someone, Layla Cunningham, in a moment, who's been a great spokesperson for the party in London. So, of course, we want to attract more really great women to serve with us and to become our candidates in the future. But we will be saying more about issues which I would argue cross the genders, but family policy, how we can help young people onto the housing ladder, how we can try to cut the cost of childcare, these kind of issues. But I don't like to just say one thing is a female-only policy, and it's not like that. And we're not going to get involved in that kind of politics.
Well, we're running out of time for my questions, but I've got two more I want to give you with. First of all, are you going to stand in Europe next time?
Yes.
And second of all, will Reform win the next by-election?
I believe it will. And, we have a superb candidate who I'm enormously proud of, epitomises everything that Reform stands for. And my message to people in Makerfield is, don't be taken for granted. Don't just be a stepping stone for Andy Burnham to get back into Parliament. The King of the North, who seems to have spent a lot of time trying to flee to the south. This guy is not an outsider. He's not so much the King of the North, he's the King of Normanshire North. He spent from his 21st year to his 45th year as a researcher, special advisor, member of Parliament, when he was parachuted into a safe seat. Let's have a breath of fresh air.
That is such a niche joke, I love it. Normanshire North is the Parliament building, for anyone who doesn't know, but that is a very good line which I'll be stealing. Shamelessly, I've sent it online. I've now got some questions from the audience that have been sent in. First of all, I think...
Your questions from the audience that have been sent in?
Yeah, been pre-sent.
Can we not have spontaneous questions?
Well, I mean, I'm reluctant to deviate from my script too much, given I'm here for one night only. But first question from Mark Davis. How will Reform deal with Britain's debt crisis?
Is Mark in the audience? No. Oh, online. Okay. Well, we're going to cut waste. there are billions. Well, let's be clear. Let's be clear. The country is going to go bankrupt. It is going to go bankrupt unless we get a grip of spending. And Nigel appreciates that. I do as well. We are going to have to cut tens of billions of pounds of waste that there is at the moment. And we've already outlined a lot of that, almost 50 billion of it. And things that I would argue only a reform government would have the backbone to actually do, like no longer pay foreign aid to rich countries, like not give benefits to people who are not British citizens, to say that we are going to save tens of billions through ending the small boats crisis, and sort of wasting money on bedsits and hotels for illegal migrants. And above all, as I said earlier, get people off welfare and into the workplace. And that is the only way that we'll resolve this.
Then from Mark Woolhouse, what is reform strategy to deal with the job destruction that will arise from the adoption of driverless vehicles and potentially AI in the office as well?
Well, I have talked about this already and will be saying more. I think the UK is almost uniquely exposed to AI. We're a 95% service-based economy, and the remainder of our economy is being decimated as a result of deindustrialisation through net zero. I've just spent the day up in Stoke-on-Trent in the ceramics business.
You made a mug,
right? I made a mug, yeah. I'm sure there must be a pun in that.
Doing a bit for British manufacturing.
But that's a business that's being destroyed
Absolutely.
as a result of Ed Miliband's energy policies. Their principal competitors are people in India, where energy prices are 20% of what they are in Stoke-on-Trent. So, if you've got 95% and growing of our economy reliant on the service sector, and that is in itself going to be completely upended by AI, you've got to have a strategy as a country. And I don't think politics is even focused on this at the moment. How is reform? And I'm very worried about it. I think it's going to be extremely difficult. There will, of course, be opportunities that come with AI, but they'll be unequal, both geographically and in terms of sectors of the economy. Maybe the UK itself doesn't even benefit from it in the way that it should do, and that the beneficiaries are other countries. The first thing that we can do is improve our energy policy so that we can actually take advantage of this. Because when we say we want a different energy policy, it's not just so that we can support the ceramics industry or the steel industry, it's so we can support the energy-intensive industries of the future, like get data centres built across our country, which simply cannot be built at the moment. So that's why the policies that are being pursued by Ed Miliband, building on what, frankly, the last Conservative government did, are the most, the greatest act of economic self-harm that I think we could possibly do as a country.
And you're hiring a new chief economic advisor.
I am, yeah.
Will it be as previewed in this week's Spectator? Are you looking at sort of...
Are you applying, James?
I don't think you need me, honestly. See my bar bill. But I just wondered, will you therefore be looking at these kind of issues when you hire them eventually?
Yeah, we will do. Look, one of the first tasks that I had when I took on this role was to reassure people that reform would be careful with their money, that we were not going to be careless or cack-handed. There's going to be no repeat of what Liz Truss did in the mini-budget. But be under no illusions, a reform government is going to be radical when it comes to the economy. I read this sort of debate that sometimes aired in The Spectator and elsewhere, that there's some kind of battle between the sort of small C conservatives and the radicals within reform. Reform on the economy is going to have to be reassuring revolutionaries. We're going to have to make sure the bond markets are content with us, that investors want to come back to the country. We bring back the Brits who we've lost to overseas, that we reassure people that a new party is capable of looking after their savings, their pensions, their mortgages. But it's going to have to be fundamentally different from what we've seen in the recent past, and that means a totally different approach to welfare, to energy, to the way we regulate, or rather deregulate, the economy. And it is going to have to be a government which actually gets back to growing the economy and creating a sense of excitement and buzz. And I genuinely believe that's possible. There are many challenges in the country which are going to take generations to fix. Some of the demographic and social cohesion issues that have happened are immensely challenging. But can we get catch-up growth in this economy? Yes, I believe we can do. if we make the right decisions quickly when we come into office, then I think we can get this country going again.
You mentioned the point about stability. Vicky Wrighton asks, with so many leadership challenges and general elections in recent years, if Reform UK were elected, what concrete measures would you put in place to guarantee stability and continuity of government from one general election to the next?
Well, it helps that we have a strong leader. And I really mean that, in that, in Nigel, we have somebody who is clearly the leader of the party, who is the party's greatest asset, and will be leader for as long as he wants to. And so the kind of soap opera that we had in the Conservative Party and you're now seeing in the Labour Party just does not apply to reform. People can have confidence in that. We will have a group of people come into Parliament, a big group of new members of Parliament, but as I said earlier, I think there will be a very collegiate group who are bound in the same sense of mission. Because when I go around the country talking to Reform members, everybody, there's a reason why people have chosen to join Reform. It's not because their mum and dad, voted for the party. The party didn't exist. It's not because, they like going to, the sort of jumble sales or some fancy gala dinner in London. These things, there are social events, don't get me wrong, but it's a very different party. Everybody's joining Reform for the same reason. They want to fix the country. And so you're going to have a group of very, very motivated people who are very ideologically aligned and I believe will be willing to do difficult things in order to fix the country, which will pay dividends.
That does beg the question, what is the best social event you've been to at Reform UK?
Well, they took me to the cheapest fish and chip shop in Britain, in Grimsby the other day, and that was a good night, actually. I have started to put weight on back when I joined Reform.
Maybe there's something about sort of the affluence, the gains that comes with that, so growing fat off the success. At what time did the night finish, Mr. Jenrick?
Well, no, the fish and chip shop, it finished quite early,
Okay.
but there's been a few late nights in Reform, that's for sure.
We've got Harry Pillar, who asks, has Reform UK become too concentrated on immigration as a single issue, neglecting other policy areas?
No. Look, obviously, a Reform government has to stop the boats. That will be mission critical for us, and we will. And we'll do whatever is necessary to do that. And it will also be a party that gets legal migration right down. But that's just the beginning. We want to make sure our streets are safe. Listen to what Layla's been saying here in London and across the country. This sense of impunity now, where people are nicking mobile phones and shoplifting and breaking into tradesmen's vans and stealing their mobile phones, their tools. That will end. And we are going to get the economy growing again. Lower people's bills, bring back good jobs, and stop, frankly, the immiseration of working people that we've seen over the course of the last 10 or 20 years.
Cuba Chakwoski asks, what do you believe is the single most important action to regain control of UK borders, and how does it differ from your previous policies as Immigration Minister?
Leave the ECHR. Leave the ECHR and restore parliamentary sovereignty. That was the absolute heart of the debate that I had within the Tory party. It was abundantly clear to me within days, weeks of becoming Immigration Minister that everything that we were trying to do was just managing the symptoms. There were these debates about, do you house people in a military camp, on a barge, in a hotel, in a bedsit? These are all terrible choices. You had to stop people coming in the first place. You had to detain and deport people. And the only way to do that is to take back control of our laws by ensuring that we leave these foreign treaties. And the last Conservative government wasn't prepared to do it. This Labour government isn't prepared to do it. It's only going to be Reform that will actually get on and do that.
You talk about the cohesion of a potential new intake. Do you think that will hold when we start to see pictures of people being detained and deported?
Yes. I really do. Because I think the people who are attracted to Reform as candidates, as members, are so united in a common mission to fix these problems. And are drawn to reform from all sorts of different perspectives. Some of them are Labour voters, some are the Tory voters. But they are appalled by the fact that the traditional political parties fail to tackle these issues. And the number of conversations I've had with people who've said, lifelong Tory voters who voted for Boris in 2019 and feel so sad and angry that he wasted that massive majority and didn't do anything with it. Lifelong Labour voters, or people who just voted for change with Keir Starmer and are appalled that he's wasted the gift that he's been given of a majority, a giant majority. We do not want to do that. We're not going to waste the majority we're lucky enough to get one at the election. And so I sincerely believe that we're going to have a group of people who will be from all walks of life and will come together to try and turn the country around.
You mentioned about the Prime Minister there, potentially on his way out after less than 2 years. It looks like there's going to be 3 contenders to replace him. Andy Burnham, Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner. Which do you think would be best for the country?
I honestly don't think it's going to make any difference. I really don't think it makes much difference. I mean, they all have sort of strengths and weaknesses.
What are they? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Do you think?
I don't think, I know it's a fun game to play, but it's not going to fix the country. It's very, very clear that if you want real change, you've got to boot out Labour. You've got to do what I did, which is to put long-standing party loyalty to one side and admit that the uni-party, the political parties that have run this country for the last 100 years have comprehensively failed, and you've got to try something different and new. And what the exciting opportunity of reform is to do something that frankly hasn't happened since around the time of the First World War, which is to forge something entirely new and to try to turn the country around.
Well, I think a night out in the fish and chip shop with Angela might be quite good fun. But final question I've got from Callum Wrighton, who asks, what is your 5-year plan from election to election to make sure the economy stays stable in the long term and not only as a short-term stint?
Well, there'll be the inheritance that we're going to have is going to be absolutely appalling. I mean, that's pretty clear. So I don't pretend it's going to be simple. It's going to take a lot of hard work. The first step is clearly going to be to cut government spending, and that is through rooting out the waste that we see today. And if we can do that, then we'll be able to cut people's taxes, and that should be focused on working people, the 80%, the people I've spoken about, helping those people to earn more of their money. We're going to be saying something about that later in the week, which I think will be very exciting. We want to ensure then that we do the hard yards of supply-side reforms, which no government has done, really, let's be honest, since the 1980s. And that is a different energy policy. It's getting the country building again. It's doing welfare reform. It's ensuring that we deregulate so that we can actually spur on businesses, large and small, to succeed. And that is a lot of work. That is a lot of work. It's going to take us at least 5 years to achieve it. But I am excited. I think the country can be turned around. And we're going to use the time we have, whether it's 1 year or 3 years in opposition, to make sure that we have a proper plan, which, frankly, no Prime Minister and government has had in recent years when they've come into office.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Robert Jenrick.
Thank you very much.
to meet you.
The king.
Mostly focusing on sort of trade regulation stuff as well. I am right now working on something related to welfare.
Okay, are we ready to go? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, it's only 2 years since Reform sort of came back after, Nigel Farage came back in that election after 2024, but I don't know if I can call Gwen Teller a Reform grandee, but he's the best they've got, I think, is fair to say, as someone who's been involved in for 20 years or so in Nigel Farage's operations. Veteran, we'll go for veteran. We've also got Emmanuel Igwe from Prosperity Institute, who focuses mostly on economic and welfare policy there. And they've also got Leila Cunningham, who, of course, is the London mayoral candidate for the party. I mean, Leila, your thoughts on the London elections?
It was great. I think we did really well. You know, we won our first London council, and it was interesting because we thought we'd do well in Havering, but we didn't think we'd smash it. You know, we got 39 councillors. We wiped out the Tories. In Barking and Dagenham, where they haven't had one non-Labour councillor elected in 16 years. It's been, you know, Labour since 1964, since its inception. And we won 9 there. Admittedly, in some parts we didn't do as good as we did, but I think there's a lesson to be learned in that, you know, we don't have a lot of historical data that other parties had. They've been around for, you know, 100 years. We've been around. I mean, this time last year, I was the only councillor in London. And I remember defecting, and I got messages from ex-Tory colleagues saying, you're daft, you're done for, you're racist, you're divisive. You know, they briefed against me. And I remember Nigel's, you know, he sat me down and goes, we're going to have to field all these candidates. And I remember going branch to branch, and it was mixed messages. You know, the CPS had just fired me for joining Reform, apparently, because I'm racist against Muslims, being a Muslim myself. And people come up to you and go, you know, I really do want to run. I believe in Reform. It'd be a packed meeting like this. And they go, but I don't want to get fired. And that was in September. And slowly, you know, we started doing much better in the polls, and it became a bit easier. But still, I would go in places where I never thought we'd get a full slate. And in the end, we did it. We got 1,500 candidates. But, you know, they're all new. Most of them have never campaigned before in their lives. And you know, it's great, and we have such a great team in London.
But I think you gave her some comments to Independent suggesting you might need to work on not softening the policy, but softening and potentially looking at the messaging in London.
No, so what happened was, so I get a message from someone in Barnet, from the Jewish community, and the Conservatives went and told the Jewish community that when Reform talk about mass deportation, they're going to get rid of the Muslims, and then they're going to get rid of the Jews. Oh yeah, I saw the messaging. And they said they're going to ban kosher, and this is what they're going to do. And because I was surprised at the turnout at this election and how many people voted Conservative, they'd never seen it before. And then I understood why. And so that's, you know, it was in that discussion, when we talk about mass deportation, it's very easily weaponized, and it can have different connotations. And we saw it weaponized. And it was disappointing that they had to play such a dirty game and not win on the merits or on their record. And they did that across London. But listen, they're not the most successful party in history for nothing, obviously. So I think, no, I think it was great. I think London's always going to be a tough nut for us to crack. And we're cracking it.
Quayne, obviously you've seen a lot of elections in terms of the past 20, 30 years or so. I mean, what were the sort of standout moments for you in terms of analysing this result for Reform?
This year?
Yeah, the locals 2 weeks ago.
I think it was somebody who sent me a meme, and one was a picture of Wakefield, and the other was a picture of Wigan. And they said, gosh, Wakefield's messy. And there was one red ward, whereas the Wigan was all teal. And it was just like, guys, I don't like Wakefield, it's a bit messy, one. But actually, the Wakefield thing in itself, I was up there a couple of weeks before the election, and in 2022, we fought hard and got 1.6% in the by-election.
Yeah.
We won 56 out of 63 seats in the council elections. Now that was quite, it was just that, literally, only 4 years ago, 1.6%. That is an astonishing thought. And so that to me was hugely important. And And actually, the other thing was I was coming back from Wakefield, I broke down outside Tamworth.
In the car, presumably, yeah.
And the AA dragged me to Brownhills in Walsall. And so I got there, and the fellow said, yeah, no problem. And then for 6 o'clock, actually, it is a problem. I'm going to have to stay overnight. Trust me, there's some really nice hotels in Walsall. I phoned up the local branch and said, are you doing anything tonight? Yeah, we're doing a few streets. And I did 2 hours knocking on doors with the local branch. And what was astonishing, it wasn't that people were positive. And every politician who's ever knocked on doors goes to people and says, really good result on the doors tonight, even if they got 2%. Really good. But I found that it wasn't that they were positive, they were impatient. It was almost, why weren't you elected last week? As it happened, Walsall was another one we absolutely walked. But it wasn't just yes, it was yes and now please. And that was an astonishing feeling. And it was door after door after door like that.
It wasn't a reluctant vote.
No, of course.
Which I found for the other parties when I've campaigned. There's a reluctance of, God, so it's all there is. I'm not going to vote Labour, so I'm just going to vote Conservative. But it was an excited vote, you know. It was, and that was exciting. Yeah.
Impatient.
Emmanuel, since the elections, we've also had a number of your former colleagues, James Graham, joined from Prosperity into the burgeoning policy unit under another of your old colleagues, Amar Johal. Tell us about the work that Prosperity is doing, because it seems that you're very much helping sketch out the kind of agenda for reform government.
I mean, the Prosperity Institute as a think tank is not party affiliated, obviously. We just tend to have, I guess, keen ears in reform, I suppose. But in terms of the kind of work we do, we are interested in aspects of energy policy. We are interested in constitutional reform. I think recently we just released a paper on how to reform how to get rid of the HRA.
Yep, Human Rights Act. Yep.
Yes, thank you very much. And on my own sort of remit as an economist, I work on trade policy. So I'm very interested in Britain and not going back into the EU regulatory orbit, and so on and so forth.
Amen.
So yeah. So those are some of a short list of some of the activities that we do at Prosperity.
I know you've got a long campaign for the London Mayoralty 2028. There's been some.
Actually, I'll be alive at the end of it.
Two things. One of all, which is, what are you going to take as the lessons from this in terms of maybe tweaking or changing in terms of strategy or issues? And second of all, it's been suggested in recent weeks that James Cleverly very much is hotting up the bid to sort of spot at City Hall this week. How do you feel about fancying campaigning?
I welcome James Cleverly. I'm just going to get all our Tregostian councillors to come and campaign for me. They love James. I welcome James. I think the main message for me in London is James, Dawn Butler, Sadiq Khan. They are the political class that destroyed this country. I'm the one that has lived with the consequences of it in London. And through, I'm not them. I'm me. I'm a Londoner. Raising my children here. I've been through the shit that everyone goes to as a result of their policies, and that's it. I've been here all my life. I haven't escaped to some Essex Tory seat. I've been here in the grind, in the smoke. What have I learned? I've learned that London is a different beast to the rest of the country, and messaging has to be very London specific. I've also learned that the perception of reform is very polarized in London. So I went to a basketball court that I used to play basketball in, and I was playing with some kids, and I've kind of got some hoops in. Anyway, at the end, I'm like, guys, you got to vote for me. I'm running for London mayor, and they're like, oh yeah, cool, sure, we'll vote for you, cool. And they're like, I'm like, yeah, so check me out on social media. So they're like, oh yeah, fine. Layla, oh shit, you're running for reform? You're going to deport my mum. And it was that kind of, I'm like, what? No. I'm like, listen, I'm the daughter of immigrants as well, but I have found that at the doorstep. And and I think obviously a lot of people get their news from social media. And I do find that social media is almost like you're in an algorithm and you're in a lane and you don't deviate. I don't get anything positive on my social media about Sadiq Khan. There must be some out there. And I'm sure that Sadiq Khan doesn't get any positive stuff about me, even though there's a lot out there. So I think people do kind of go into this tunnel vision, and the tunnel vision of some of the algorithms for London is, we are completely anti-immigrant and we're going to deport immigrants, and were racist, you know. And I think I'm quite a good person to dispel that.
Yeah.
You know, we have people from all walks of life joining reform. And I always say this, you know, I come from the point of immigration from immense gratitude, where, you know, my parents came here in the 60s. Thank God they chose England. But also from a point of realism, you know, my parents came here for a British country, for British values, for a British way of life, for a British culture, for British signs, for everything to do with Britain. If they wanted a quasi-Egyptian village, they would have stayed in Egypt. I mean, that's the truth. And so I fundamentally reject the idea that because you're the daughter of immigrants, you somehow have to be for mass migration. That's, you know, wanting controlled immigration and wanting to preserve British values is not contradictory to being the daughter of immigrants.
And what does pro-London or London-centric messaging look like then? Is it a kind of pro-limited migration positive story?
You know, I went to speak at the Oxford Union, and I speak to so many young people in doing amazing degrees, and I'm like, do you want to live in London when you graduate? And they're like, no. They don't want to London is not the dream anymore. I spoke to a lady who's Jewish, and she works at LBC, and she was like, you know, thank God I moved out of London. And I'm like, just that sentence for me is heartbreaking. London used to be the dream. You know, now it is the nightmare for many. It's the nightmare for the Jewish community, and it's not a nightmare for young people, but it offers no hope. It's a last resort. And that is a fundamental failure, because it is the best city in the world. Let's tell it how it is. But how can it be when I put out a tweet the other day? It was my most viral tweet, and it was a description of, you know, someone who's on 60 grand, earns very well, went to Oxford, you know, can only afford kind of a one bed in God knows where. Whereas you get someone who arrived on a boat, is granted refugee status, gets to get a zone 2 flat, and has more housing security in this city than someone who's born and raised, went to university. And that is a fundamental failure. And the failure does lie at both political parties who failed to build. You know, we've effectively stunted house building because of regulation and environmental factors. In fact, Sadiq Khan the other day was boasting about how much environmental regulation he has imposed on house builders. Imagine that. I would like to boast about how many young people have owned a home at the end of my 10, whatever it's called. I'm not sure what it's called. Male team.
Decade-long service.
But yeah, so I think for me, it's I want people from the top universities to be like, I want to move to London, I want to work in London, and that will only happen when you have, you know, tech companies, AI companies. We need to be that superpower hub, and that means being open for business.
Gwen, you've obviously talked for years about the potential for reform or a Farage-led party in places like Wales.
Yep.
You know, obviously there they won, I think, 34 seats,
Right.
won 17 in Scotland as well. Just say why this is really important in terms of kind of building up the national picture of Reform UK.
Well, I suppose many times, and over the years, you're an English nationalist party. Hard to say that when you are the second party in Wales and the equal second in Scotland. It changes that dynamic. We just aren't. We are a national party, and we do well. We win seats in Plymouth, we win seats in Sunderland, we win seats in Aberdeen, we win seats in Cardiff, and in London. Wherever you go in the country, Reform are picking up seats, and that, I think, when you're competing with the other parties, we are a national party. We are a party for the whole country, and that is something I don't think the Lib Dems can say. I don't think the Tories can say anymore, and it's getting very hard for Labour to say, and certainly not the case for the Greens. So if you want a party that actually speaks to all the country and listens to all the country, it is the only one that's in the game. And I think that is hugely important, because in the past we have been, famously, the Lib Dems are very good, I think, voting efficiency, where 50% of their votes are in the seats they won, which means they're not going to win any more. It's just that they're going to probably keep those ones. And we were very thin. We had a lot of votes, but very thinly spread. We're now starting to build places where we have depth as well as breadth, and I think.
But also we won in places where the Conservatives can never win, and we won in places that Labour can never win.
Yep.
We are outflanking all parties on all sides. They have no idea what to do with us.
And I think the reason for that is we speak, as Robert was saying, we speak with a voice that chimes with such a large number of people in this country. No, it's not a full majority. It never will be. We don't expect it's almost a sort of a one-brain society. But there's nobody else that chimes so loudly. And it's often amongst people who had given up, who thought that nobody would ever listen to them, nobody would ever actually speak listen to them. And I think that changes the game, because it makes psephologists tremble, because they don't know where this vote's coming from.
Emmanuel, just one question to you before I go for a final quick one to you all. You know, you're working very much on welfare.
Yes.
The challenges we've seen with repeated governments is cutting that welfare bill, which seems to be ballooning, 100 billion by 2031. I mean, how can reform sell a pro-welfare cutting message to a public that seems somewhat hostile?
I think it's important to be able to, first of all, sort of look at the wider scope of the welfare kind of budget. So, welfare budget right now is about £333 billion. About 45% of that is on the triple lock, which is about £142 billion thereabouts. The remainder of that is mostly split between universal credit, employment support allowance, job seekers allowance, and a few other trinkets of benefits. And the huge challenge when we think about trying to revive the economy to a position that is productive is that if we're going to endeavor to reform the welfare state, there isn't an easy way to talk about reform without looking at the triple lock. And it's a very uncomfortable thing to say, but and it's very challenging, because a lot of people would not agree with the idea that, you know, we need to do something about the triple lock. But without any substantial reform to the triple lock, any kind of reform to welfare would be very minimal. So my estimates, based on what I've been calculating recently, has basically the best I can get, you know, and this is reform to disability benefits, would be somewhere in the region of about maybe 15 to 20 billion pounds worth of savings, which is very good. But if you're looking for seismic kind of reform that could shift the dial on productivity, you'd need to do something more aggressive. So now, I guess, coming to your question about how do we sell that message, I think the reality is that, you know, there needs to be a recognition of the impact the triple lock right now will have on the future generation. And I think if we can speak to current pensioners, retirees, based on the understanding that if we keep this going, your children would have to bear the brunt of it all. Then perhaps.
I think the key word in welfare is fair.
Yeah.
Make it fair.
Indeed.
And I think that's what you're touching on.
Indeed.
Make it fair.
Yeah.
And I think with working people, nobody hates somebody sitting there at home doing very little than somebody next door who got up at 6, is out the door at 6:30 and comes back at 7 and has to feed their children.
Even if it's my
it's
kids,
not
it annoys
fair
me.
on them. And I think focusing on the fair of welfare, I think is something, if messaging is what you've got to do.
And just as a final quick question, is reform going to win Makerfield?
Hell yeah.
Gwen?
I think it's the most important by-election possibly in the time since universal suffrage. I really do. And it's
No pressure, Robert.
Steady on.
No,
you're right.
It is a hinge election that is wither England. It really is wither England. Do we go down the statist, semi-Marxist approach, or do we go down to freedom and liberty? That's what it is,
But hang
and
on,
we can
James,
win that.
I don't know if any of you have noticed. So I watch the news every day, and you've got these cabinet ministers who go on the news and go, "We fully support the Prime Minister. He's not going anywhere. He's going to lead us into the next election. He has my full support. But we must win this by-election. It's absolutely essential that we get a Labour MP in Makerfield. Mate, you had one, you're like, hang on, but you're going to campaign for the by-election that's just been called to remove the Prime Minister. They've almost given up on even trying to sound remotely as if they mean anything. They just take us for fools. It's shocking.
Well, there you go. Make a field, make a history. Thank you very much, Gwen. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Leila. And thank you for tuning into this Politics UK.